Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. India's latest GDP numbers are out. It's a mixed bag, but the overall picture looks positive. Global ratings agency Moody's has upgraded India's outlook. We'll bring you the details and the analysis. Meanwhile, in China, it's not looking so good. The economy is in poor shape and Xi Jinping is facing dissent from his own party. Another neighbor, Pakistan, has invited India for the SCO summit. Will Prime Minister Modi go to Pakistan? We'll tell you what Foreign Minister Jaishankar said today. In the US, Kamala Harris had her first major interview and she's getting a lot of flack for her policy flip-flops. In Africa, a new race for influence. The US has bagged two major projects as it competes with China and Russia for influence. In the Kolkata rape and murder case, leaked audio clips implicate the college. In Europe, is a reset with Turkey on the cards? A meeting yesterday has triggered speculation. The big merger in Indian aviation, Vistara, will cease operations soon as it becomes part of Air India. Such mergers have not succeeded in the past. Will they be able to beat the odds this time? Can you boost productivity by chaining your employees to the desk? Some companies are trying. We'll tell you about them. And when was the last time you reviewed your life? Which stories did you focus on and which ones did you leave out? The answers are more important than you imagine. We'll explain the headlines first. A power blackout plunges Venezuela into darkness. All 24 states report total or partial loss of electricity. President Nicolas Maduro's government calls it, quote-unquote, an electrical sabotage. Venezuela experiences frequent blackouts. Maduro's government often attributes it to unproven conspiracies to overthrow him. India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doal meets the Sri Lankan president. They discuss bilateral economic cooperation. Ajit Doal is in Colombo to attend the Colombo Security Conclave. The focus of the summit is on maritime security, counter-terrorism and cyber security. Will Mongolia arrest Vladimir Putin? The Russian president will travel there on Tuesday. It will be Putin's first trip to a member state of the International Criminal Court. Last year, the ICC had issued an arrest warrant for him, but the Kremlin says they're not worried about Putin being arrested during his visit. Spanish Prime Minister to visit China in September. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is expected to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping. The visit comes amid a trade row between Beijing and the European Union. The standoff is over Chinese subsidies for electric vehicles. Spain is the Eurozone's fourth largest economy. England braces for chaos. Heathrow Airport's border staff announced a new strike. The 4-day strike over working conditions will begin tomorrow. Hundreds of workers had staged a similar strike in April. London's Heathrow Airport is one of the biggest in the world. And India wins its first gold medal at the 2024 Paralympics. Avni Lekhara clinches the women's 10-meter air rifle event. She has now become the first Indian woman to win 2 Paralympic gold medals. The President and Prime Minister laud Avni's golden feat. India's GDP numbers are out and there is good news and bad news. First, the good news. India remains the fastest growing major economy in the world. The GDP grew at 6.7% in the first quarter of this financial year. That's April, May and June. That is the first quarter. China, on the other hand, grew at 4.7%. So India still holds the crown. That is the good news. And now the bad news. The growth rate is slowing down. Look at the same quarter last year. The GDP grew at 8.2%. Of course, that was a post-pandemic rebound, so not quite sustainable. But also look at the previous quarter, January, February and March. the first 3 months of this year, the GDP still grew by 7.8%. So India's central bank was quite optimistic. They predicted 7.1% growth in this quarter. But the actual rate was 6.7%. That's 4 points below the RBI's prediction. It's the slowest growth rate in 5 quarters. So what went wrong here? Most experts point to a couple of reasons. Number one, reduced government spending. We had a general election in the last quarter. So public spending was muted. You don't splurge in the middle of voting. That's one reason. Reason number two, private consumption was low. Most businesses reported a drop in footfall and they attributed it to the heat wave. Fewer people in stores equals less spending. Less spending equals slower growth. Which brings us to the final reason, a slowdown in agriculture. This sector grew 3.7% in the first quarter of last year. But it grew just 2% this year. Again, blame the weather for this. Most of North India reported intense heat waves. Chances are that reduced the output. But it's not all gloomy. We had a lot of rain in the second quarter, so the hope is that farming will pick up again. As for the other sectors, things are looking quite good. Manufacturing grew by 7% last quarter. Last year, it was just 5%, this time 7%. Construction sector expanded by 8.6%. And services grew by 7.1%. So the trajectory should be good. Ratings agency Moody's has upgraded India's outlook. They're expecting India to grow by 7.2% this year. Their previous prediction was 6.8%. Having said that, these numbers will raise some questions too. It's the first GDP report in Prime Minister Modi's third term. He would have been hoping for a better showing. The chief economic advisor says this was expected. He says the growth outlook remains strong. It's also a challenge for the Reserve Bank. You see, they have kept interest rates steady since February last year. But will these numbers force a rethink? Will the RBI consider cutting rates to stimulate growth? That's hard to do when food inflation is at 5%. I know these numbers will be dissected in the coming days, so let's focus on the big picture tonight. India continues to defy global trends. We have 2 major wars underway. One is in West Asia, the other is in Europe. So most supply chains are in crisis. Plus major economies are slowing down. The US and Japan reported slower growth rates. Germany is stagnating and China is struggling to regain its mojo. Despite this gloom, India is pushing on. Consider exports in the last quarter. 8.7% growth compared to the global average of 1%, 8.7% for India. Even wealth creation does not seem to be a problem. Let me show you a new report. It says India is minting a billionaire every 5 days. 1 billionaire every 5 days. Imagine that. We had 109 billionaires in 2014. We have 334 now. So put together, they're worth $1.9 trillion. That's more than the GDP of Saudi Arabia. Impressive, right? But here's the less impressive part. Billionaires make up more than half of India's GDP. It tells you what the country's next challenge is. Equity. Our economic pie is expanding every quarter. The key is to make sure that everyone gets a slice of it. So India's economy is doing well. We can't say the same for China, though. Fresh projections are out. China had set a growth target of 5% this year. There's a high chance that they'll miss that target. China's economy has been in a bad shape for years now. And Xi Jinping is finally facing some heat over it. Reports say there is a rebellion against the Chinese president. And that too from within the Communist Party. 2 influential camps are angry with Xi Jinping. There was a showdown in July. It happened during the 3rd plenum. It's one of the most important meetings of the Communist Party. We told you about it on the show. This 3rd plenum happens every 5 years. Top leaders, senior party members and experts meet for a period of 4 days. They chart out China's economic policy. These meetings happen behind closed doors. So the outside world knows very little about what transpired here. Also, reports of dissent are extremely rare in China, which is what makes these claims quite significant. But what is it that triggered this dissent? Apparently a propaganda piece on Xi Jinping. Ahead of the plenum's opening, Xinhua published it. The headline said, Xi Jinping the Reformer. It was basically a 10,000-word ode to Xi. It hailed his economic policies and called Xi a great reformer, a leader on a par with Deng Xiaoping. Remember, Deng opened the Chinese economy to the world. It was his policies that made China an economic powerhouse. And Xinhua compared Deng to Xi Jinping. Now, none of this is out of the ordinary. What else do you expect from a mouthpiece like Xinhua? Of course, they will sing praises of the Chinese president and try to reinforce his authority ahead of an important event. But at the plenum, this propaganda piece backfired on Xi Jinping. It was strongly criticized. It was called strange and factually incorrect and not in line with the history of the party. These critics even asked who allowed this piece to be published. And who are these critics? Well, there are two groups. One group is made up of party elders, the retired members of the Communist Party. They held senior positions in the government in the past. Many of them end up serving as advisors to the party after retirement. They form the first group of critics, the elders. The second group is called the second generation Reds. These are the children of Communist Party leaders from the revolution era. Basically, the second generation of Chinese politicians. So both these groups raised concerns. And thanks to the pressure they built, this propaganda piece was withdrawn. It was not published in papers and it was scrubbed off the internet before the third plenum ended. Like I said, this is quite significant. Dissent against Xi Jinping is very rare. What's even more rare is the Chinese president yielding to his critics. Xi Jinping is called China's most powerful leader since Mao Zedong. And this summer, his critics forced his hand. Does that mean that his grip on power is weakening? We'd say that assessment would be premature, but it would be fair to say that China's economic situation is testing its president. The slowdown is creating new and unexpected challenges. I'll give you an example. There are now ghost railway stations in China. These stations are brand new with all the latest facilities, but they have no passengers. No trains stop at these stations, and China has 26 of them. They were first built and they've now been decommissioned. And they're all in remote locations with not much passenger traffic. So they weren't really needed, but China built them nonetheless. Experts are calling these projects, and I'm quoting, wasted investments. They were all part of China's infrastructure boom. When local governments borrowed billions of dollars, they pumped this money into infrastructure projects without assessing the utility of these projects. And this led to a bubble in the infra sector. That bubble has now burst, leaving behind ghost towns and stations and a massive pile of debt. Local governments in China owe $13 trillion. $13 trillion is the debt. Some of them are on the brink of a default. They're resorting to extreme measures, like in the Bishan district. This is in southwest China. Bishan is unable to keep up with its debt, so it has set up a task force. And what will its officials do? Well, they say they specialize in smashing iron pots and selling the steel. This is basically a Chinese metaphor. Smashing iron pots and selling the steel. It means selling off all assets to settle debt. So Bishan is basically doing a fire sale. We don't know its debt numbers, but clearly the situation is far from ideal, or a fire sale wouldn't have been necessary. China needs to tackle its debt urgently and rescue its economy. Its people are already running out of patience. They have begun protesting. In the months of June and July, there were more than 500 protests in China, mostly over economic issues. The protesters were workers, or property owners and buyers. They took to the streets, they raised their voice online. The workers they were protesting over wages, they wanted better wages. Homeowners wanted stalled projects to resume to get the homes that they had bought. So the writing is on the wall for Xi Jinping. There is dissent within the Communist Party and anger among ordinary Chinese citizens. Back to India now. We've discussed India's economic policy. Now let's look at foreign policy. Prime Minister Modi has repeatedly said neighborhood first, whether it's Sri Lanka or Bangladesh or Nepal. Neighborhood first. But that policy has a clear exception. Pakistan, and with good reason. No country has hurt India like Pakistan has. The relationship had a predictable trajectory. India reaches out in good faith, some sort of progress is made, but Pakistan's army spoils everything. And since 2019, even that has ended. India revoked Jammu and Kashmir's special status. In response, Pakistan lashed out. They recalled their High Commissioner from India. So tonight, we're looking at where this relationship stands and what does the future hold. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar spoke about it today. He says the era of uninterrupted talks is over.
Let me say this. I think the era of uninterrupted dialogue with Pakistan is over. Actions have consequences. And insofar as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, I think 370 is done.
What exactly does that mean? The minister did not elaborate on the statement, but maybe he's saying, don't expect India to reach out again. We've been double-crossed multiple times, so no more outreaches. And you can't really blame him. Pakistan continues to fuel terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. Earlier, their focus was Kashmir. Now it is Jammu. Dozens of terror attacks have been reported since 2021. Jammu now makes up 40% of army casualties. Which brings us to the current equation. Both sides have clear demands. India wants Pakistan to stop supporting terrorism. Pakistan wants India to restore Kashmir's special status. Do you see the problem here? India's demand is legitimate. If you have the political will, it is doable, stopping terrorism. But Pakistan's demand is not. Jammu and Kashmir is a domestic issue for India. It is Indian land, it's an internal matter. So how can you dictate domestic policy to another country? Minister Jaishankar made India's position clear today. Article 370 is done. This is the law that gave the special status to Jammu and Kashmir. India scrapped it 5 years ago. There is no going back to it. And Pakistan blames this move for downgrading ties. They have no High Commissioner in India. India has no High Commissioner in Pakistan. There are no bilateral visits, no formal bilateral trade, and no discussions. It's a frosty deadlock. The only breakthrough came in 2021. That is when India and Pakistan renewed a ceasefire deal, and surprisingly, it has done well. The line of control is more stable than it used to be. But the question is, what is the next step? Well, any relationship needs a push. It's a question of who will make that push. And India has no reason to. We gain nothing by reaching out at the moment. But on the other side, it's very different. Pakistan's economy is going through a major crisis. They could use the trade and investments from India. And we are seeing indications of that. In the month of March, Pakistan's foreign minister made an important statement. He said Islamabad would consider resuming trade. But India rejected that possibility. Jaishankar said trade and terror cannot go hand in hand. So the status quo is pretty clear. Pakistan needs India more than India needs Pakistan.
Perhaps India is content to continue at the current level of relationship. Maybe yes, maybe no. What I do want to say is we are not passive, and whether events take a positive or a negative direction, either way we will react to it.
New Delhi has almost dismissed Islamabad as a failed state, an inconsequential neighbor. There's just one problem though. The rest of the world may not share that opinion. The Americans are selling weapons to Pakistan again. Gulf states are investing billions of dollars into Pakistan. Even Russia is selling fuel and gas. So in the short run, Pakistan may not be a threat. But with global support, you never know. Pakistan may emerge as a more potent threat. So of course, that's all in the future. Right now, the onus is still on Pakistan to make a move. But are they willing? Well, Pakistan is hosting this year's SCO summit. SCO is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. India is a member of this group, so is Pakistan. So they've invited Prime Minister Modi to Islamabad in the month of October. But will he attend? The Foreign Ministry in India did not confirm or deny.
Yes, we have received the invitation for attending the Heads of Government Summit of SCO from Pakistan, which will be hosted by Pakistan. And on that, as and when we have an update, we'll share them with you.
Irrespective, attendance alone will not signal much. After all, this is a multilateral forum. Last year, India hosted the SCO foreign ministers, and Pakistan's foreign minister did fly down to India. But nothing changed bilaterally. So it's not a question of hosting or visiting. It's a question of what more can Pakistan offer, not just in terms of engagement, but in terms of actions too. If there is a clear crackdown on terrorism, India may reciprocate. If not, India won't bother. It was the morning of July 21st. Kamala Harris was busy flipping pancakes. That's when she got a call. It was Joe Biden. He was dropping out of the presidential race, and that day changed her life. And Harris talked about it in her first major interview. The chat was just 27 minutes long, yet she's getting a lot of flack for it. Why? Because of her many flip-flops. As a lawyer, Kamala Harris opposed fracking and the border wall. Now, as a presidential candidate, she seems to have embraced both. But will the American voter buy this back and forth? Our next report tells you.
I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
On July 21st, Joe Biden dropped out of the US presidential race. He endorsed Kamala Harris. Within a month, the Democrats rallied behind her. She won the party nomination. She became the presidential candidate. The mood was optimistic. Yet, all this happened without Harris winning a single vote, or even giving a single interview. The Democratic nominee aimed to change that on Thursday. She sat down with CNN for her first interview as the Democratic nominee. Beside her was Tim Walz, her vice presidential pick. It was meant to be a chat to get to know Harris. Yet what it turned out to be was 27 minutes of flip-flops. Kamala Harris first ran for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination in 2019. Then she was seen as a liberal progressive candidate. But now, as the Democratic presidential hopeful, she seems to have embraced the status quo. And it's something she was asked about.
Sir, I have just a few.
I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed.
So Harris says her values haven't changed. But is that true? Let's look a little closer. The first flip-flop was on fracking. It's the process where you drill into shale to extract natural gas and oil. In 2019, she was against fracking. And it makes sense. Remember, Harris was a progressive then. Fracking raised concerns about climate change, so she opposed it. But that changed in 2020, the moment she became the VP candidate. And now she seems to support it.
As vice president, I did not ban fracking. As president, I will not ban fracking. What I've seen is that we can grow and we can increase a thriving clean energy economy without banning fracking.
The second flip-flop was on the border wall. In 2018, Donald Trump started building a wall on the southern US border. Kamala Harris opposed it. She called it un-American, labeling it a medieval vanity project. In 2024, Harris pledges to spend millions on that same wall if she's elected president. All this while opposing Trump.
He killed the bill, a border security bill, that would have put 1,500 more agents on the border. Not only push it, I would make sure that it would come to my desk and I would sign it.
The contradictions did not end there. After Harris, it was Tim Walz's turn. In 2018, he claimed he carried weapons of war. But he's never been deployed to a combat zone. So his statement was questioned.
Thanks for putting your trust in me.
And this is how he defended himself yesterday. Walz says he misspoke.
Yeah, in this case, this was after a school shooting, and my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar is not always correct.
That sums up Kamala Harris's first interview. A lot of flip-flops, clarifications, defending the current administration, and a dash of Trump bashing.
Anybody who's about beating down other people is a coward.
When asked about the historic nature of her candidacy, Harris almost seemed cautious, as if she wants to distance herself from it, probably wanting to avoid Hillary Clinton's mistake in 2016. So here's her plan as the future American president in a nutshell. It's to project continuity. It's to hug Biden's record and further it. But will America embrace this? We'll find out this November.
Our next story is about Africa and a battle taking place over the continent, a shadowy battle for influence. Now, as most of you know, Africa suffered under European colonization. It was known as the Scramble for Africa. The continent was carved up by Western powers and mercilessly exploited. Even today, the scars of that colonization are very visible. But before the old wounds could fully heal, a new scramble has already begun. The key players are Russia, China, and the US. They're not looking to colonize Africa this time. What they are doing is expanding their influence by offering economic assistance. It's an old trick. Come in with promises of aid and then stick around for the resources. The entire African continent has seen this before, but they clearly haven't learned from history. This week, the US sealed 2 deals in 2 different corners of the continent. Tanzania in the east and Ghana in the west. Let's start by looking at Tanzania. It is in East Africa. The largest city there is Dar es Salaam. It is home to the nation's largest port. In fact, it is Africa's 4th largest port on the Indian Ocean side, making it extremely important for trade. And the US wants to take advantage of this. So it has offered to pay $250 million to develop a railway line through Tanzania. Now, $250 million is no joke. So why is the US being so generous? 2 reasons. First, it will help American trade via the Lobito corridor. Lobito is a port city on the other side of Africa in Angola. The US is developing a port there too and creating a rail corridor that begins there. This railway line will pass through 4 African nations: Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zambia, and then finally Tanzania. The corridor will cut through the entire African continent, connecting the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans. And that's not all. It will also link ports with mines, the ports of Lobito and Dar es Salaam, with mines in the DRC and Zambia. Now, when you join the dots, what do you see? A grand plan to exploit Africa's mineral wealth. This is America's plan. And Tanzania was the last part of the puzzle, hence the $250 million investment. This is the first reason. The second reason is the scramble for influence in Africa. And here the US is competing with China. China already has a strong presence in the region. It has multiple mines in Zambia. It is also investing in railway stations and renovations. So the US is basically playing catch up. And with this latest move, Washington will be hoping to one-up Beijing. How will China respond? Well, it already has. You see, for years, China was pouring money all over Africa, approving loans worth over $10 billion every year. But those loans dried up. They were on the decline since 2016. But recently, that trend has changed. A new study is out. It says last year, China increased its lending to Africa. It is definitely wary about losing influence. Meanwhile, the US is doubling down on its Africa plans. I mentioned their second victory in Ghana. Look at this press release from the US State Department. It announces a landmark commercial agreement with Ghana for a small nuclear reactor project. Now, Ghana has been trying to get a nuclear reactor for a while now, and it has been weighing up offers from 5 countries: China, South Korea, France, Russia, and the US. Companies from these 5 countries were bidding for the contract. Now, it seems the American company has won. The agreement was signed yesterday. This is a major win for the US. It has been lagging behind in the African nuclear race. It's been losing out to Russia in a number of countries. At one point, Moscow looked unbeatable in Africa, but now Washington has pulled off an upset. Russia and China won't take this lying down, though. Beijing is already handing out more loans. Moscow may take similar actions. The only thing we can say for sure is that the new scramble for Africa is on.
aviation.
The heat is on the RG Kar Medical College. A leaked audio call confirms an earlier suspicion that the college may have tried to cover up the murder, that they passed it off as suicide. There were 3 calls in total. All of them were allegedly made to the victim's father. By whom? An assistant superintendent at the hospital. In the first call, the father was informed that his daughter was in hospital. No further details. In the second call, he was told that she was critical. And in the third, she was told that it could be a suicide. And when did these calls happen? The first one was at around 10:50 a.m. So the morning of the murder. Listen in.
মেয়েকে আমরা এমার্জেন্সিতে নিয়ে এসেছি, আপনারা আসুন, এসে যোগাযোগ করুন। ওনার অবস্থা খুবই খারাপ, আপনি যতটা তাড়াতাড়ি পারবেন চলে আসুন। উনি সুসাইড করেছেন হয়তো, বা কিছু মারা গেছেন। পুলিশ রয়েছে, আমরা হসপিটালে সবার সামনেই রয়েছি, ফোন করছি, আপনারা যতটা তাড়াতাড়ি পারবেন চলে আসুন।
Now, just to be clear, we cannot confirm the authenticity of these clips. The father himself is not sure. He doesn't know where these clips came from. And what about the Kolkata police? Well, they say we never described the death as a suicide. Yet questions remain because the CBI did talk about the suicide claim. They said that the family had been misled about the death. The only question is, by whom? This audio suggests it was the college. Meanwhile, the political blame game is gathering speed. Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee has written to Prime Minister Modi. This is her second letter in 2 weeks. She is asking the central government to introduce tougher laws. That's what Mamata Banerjee wants. The centre should introduce tougher laws. Her position is that the centre is not serious about rape. Of course, New Delhi has rejected this. A union minister had replied to Mamata Banerjee's first letter. She posed some tough questions to the West Bengal chief minister, like why are 11 fast-track courts yet to be set up in the state? Why is there a backlog of 48,000 rape and POCSO cases? The chief minister did try to defend her record, but let's face it, this is all for political mileage. Mamata Banerjee plans to introduce a new bill on Monday, an anti-rape bill. It mandates capital punishment for rape. Look at how one official described it. Every culprit of rape, if found guilty, will be hanged. Now, this is a serious discussion because the jury is still out on death penalty for rapes. One group says it's necessary, that such a punishment will deter rapes. The other group says it is counterproductive. You see, a lot of rapists are convicted based on the survivor's testimony. So attackers may not stop at rape. They may murder the victims to destroy evidence. So my point here is simple. We are talking about a very complicated issue. It needs systemic solutions that start at home, continue in school, get enforced at the workplace, and are protected by the law. What we don't need is political grandstanding. Unfortunately, it's happening on both sides. The ruling TMC party held a protest rally today. So did the opposition BJP. BJP leaders marched to the State Women's Commission office. They tried to lock the gates in a symbolic protest. If you see this political discourse, it is pure hypocrisy. Rapes happen in every single Indian state. If you rule that state, you remain silent. If it happens elsewhere, you discover your voice. The same thing is happening here. The TMC is asking, what about the rapes in Uttar Pradesh or in Haryana or in Rajasthan, which is a fair question. But why are you raising it now? Because there has been a rape and murder in your own state. I'm afraid this politics must change. Parties need to realize that women's safety is a national issue, not a political football, not a topic for blame game. It is a national issue. Unless that happens, we won't see meaningful change. Our next story is about Europe and a country with one foot in the door, Turkey. Turkey shares a tense relationship with Europe, specifically with the European Union. For decades, Turkey has wanted to become an EU member. It became a candidate all the way back in 1999. Membership negotiations began in the year 2005, almost 20 years ago, but the negotiations were frozen in 2016, and in 2019, the EU voted to suspend Turkey's accession talks. It was a major blow to Ankara's European ambitions, and there's been bad blood ever since. But yesterday, a thaw seemed to have taken place. Turkey's foreign minister went to an EU meeting yesterday after 5 long years. It signals a rapprochement, a cooling of tensions. But does this mean that Turkey is any closer to joining the EU? Our next report has the details.
Turkey and the EU, their relationship often sounds like a bad love story. A will they or won't they situation where everyone seems uncomfortable. It began in 1999. That's when Turkey was made an EU candidate. It's the first step in becoming a member. Over the next few years, Turkey tried to bring in some reforms, clean up its internal politics so that the EU would begin accession talks. And the plan worked. Talks began in 2005. But just before that, Turkey elected a new leader for itself, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. In 2003, Erdogan became Turkey's Prime Minister. Yes, Prime Minister. He held that post till 2014. All that while, the EU talks kept chugging along. But in 2014, Erdogan flipped the script. He changed Turkey's power structure. From a parliamentary democracy, Turkey became a presidential republic. And of course, he made sure that he became Turkey's first directly elected president. Now, Erdogan was always a popular politician. He did keep winning elections over the years, but the 2014 flip was a watershed moment. Erdogan seemed to believe he was some sort of Ottoman Sultan reincarnated. He wanted to change the very foundations of modern Turkey and take it back to a bygone era where democracy gave way to absolute power, both administrative and spiritual. But on his quest to become a modern-day Ottoman caliph, Erdogan alienated the EU. And things came to a head in 2016. Some 3,000 members of the Turkish armed forces attempted to orchestrate a coup. They failed and the plotters were arrested. Erdogan saw the failed coup as an opportunity, a chance to purge his political opponents. That's exactly what he did. About 150,000 people were detained after the coup. Tens of thousands were arrested on terrorism charges. And that was the last straw for the EU. Turkey's EU accession talks were paused. 3 years later, in 2019, the European Parliament suspended negotiations. It's been 5 years since that happened, and these years have been hard on Erdogan. He's been struggling to curb inflation, which has hovered around the 70% mark over the past few years. The Turkish currency, the lira, lies in tatters. Its value has fallen by 80% in the last 5 years. Now, obviously, the people of Turkey were angry, and it showed in this year's elections. Erdogan's party was defeated across the country. The Turkish opposition took major cities like Istanbul and Ankara. It was a reality check for the would-be Sultan. So now, after years of being confrontational, it seems Erdogan wants to go back to the negotiating table. The EU took the first step towards reconciliation. They invited Turkey's foreign minister to an informal meet yesterday. The Turkish minister attended the meeting in Brussels and said it was in everyone's interest to revive Turkey-EU ties. While this doesn't mean that the EU will restart accession talks this instant, it's a step towards bringing Turkey back into the fold. But for that to actually happen, Erdogan will have to keep his autocratic tendencies in check.
Our next story is about Indian aviation. The industry is at a turning point. Two heavyweights are finally merging. Air India and Vistara, both airlines are owned by the Tata Group. Earlier, both brands were operating separately, but now they will be one entity. So from November onwards, this November onwards, Vistara would disappear from the Indian skies. It is being merged into Air India. So effectively, the Tatas are retiring the Vistara brand name. And this has triggered strong emotions. Air India used to be a state carrier. The Tatas bought it from the government in 2022. You could also say that Air India returned to the Tatas because they were the ones who started Air India way back in 1932. In 1953, the airline was nationalized. The government took it over. It became India's flagship carrier and one of the best airlines in the world. It was called the King of the Sky, and its mascot, the Maharaja, became iconic. But under government control, Air India suffered. It ran into losses, it struggled to compete, its services were poor, its workforce lethargic, and the brand name suffered due to neglect. So the Tata Group's comeback raised everyone's hopes for a revival of Air India. And while that is yet to happen, the revival is yet to happen, what we are seeing is the departure of Vistara. The Tata started Vistara in 2013. It was their comeback into aviation. Over the years, Vistara has developed strong brand loyalty. So after today's announcement, many frequent flyers took to social media. They bid farewell to Vistara. Some also expressed doubts about the merger. They're not sure if it will succeed. But the Tatas are confident about their plans. They say the transition will be smooth and hassle-free. And that with the merger, their customers will have more choice. Of course, the merger did not come about overnight. It's been in the works for 2 years. The Tatas also have a strategic investor here. That is Singapore Airlines. It co-owned Vistara with the Tatas, and it is betting on this merger now. Singapore Airlines plans to invest more than $600 million. In return, it will own around 25% of the merged entity. And with this, Singapore Airlines will be the only foreign airline with a direct stake in an Indian carrier. So on paper, the new Air India, in fact, is ticking a lot of boxes, this new merged entity. And yet this merger has not been smooth sailing. In the month of May, there was a strike. More than 100 crew members called in sick at the time. Suddenly, Air India had to delay or cancel a lot of flights. At least 175 flights were affected. The strike led to chaos across airports. Hundreds of passengers were hit. But why did the employees go on strike? Because of their new employment contracts. The crew members said that the airline was discriminating against them. Meanwhile, there have been operational issues. The Indian regulator has pulled up Air India. That's the DGCA, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation. That is the regulator. Earlier this year, the DGCA issued a notice to Air India. This was after passengers fainted on a flight. There was, and I'm quoting, there was insufficient cooling in the cabin. There have been complaints related to pilots as well. In April, it was found that many Vistara pilots were flying for 100 hours per month, which is the maximum permissible limit. So the Air India Pilots Union expressed concerns. They wrote a letter, and the letter said that some pilots had been asked to extend their flight duty timings, and they warned that this could compromise safety. So this merger is testing Air India on a lot of fronts. To make matters worse, the market is quite challenging. India remains the world's fastest growing aviation market, but Indian airlines are running in losses. Take a look at this report. This year, Indian airlines are projected to lose big money, anywhere between $400 and $600 million. This is despite the growing demand and the rising ticket prices, because the cost of operating an airline still remains quite high. So Air India may face some more turbulence in the near future. The merger is a bold move. In the past, such initiatives have not had much success. There is a long list of failed mergers: Jet Airways and Air Sahara, Kingfisher Airlines and Air Deccan. Even Indian Airlines and Air India, none of these mergers ended well. Either carriers went bust or they ran into financial difficulties. Air India is trying to beat the odds, and we wish them good luck. Our next story is about productivity. A modern boss has found a new way to enhance it. Do you know what's his magic solution? Shackling workers to their desks. It may sound dystopian, but that's what an Australian mining boss wants, and he's not alone. Across the globe, bosses are chastising employees for leaving a minute early. Companies are monitoring productivity using AI. CEOs want employees to work every single minute. But here's a thought for them. Maybe the secret to unlocking productivity is not forcing people to stay in the building. Our next report tells you why.
We live in the age of modern technology. It's fast-paced, it's revolutionizing our lives. So you would imagine it would change the way we work, that we would be more free, that we would use tech to become flexible. But no. Enter the modern CEO. They're no longer an executive, they're more like a part-time prison warden. They have a sacred mission to extract every ounce of productivity from their workforce. And how are they doing that? By holding workers captive. At least that's what Chris Ellison wants. He's the managing director of Mineral Resources. According to him, employees going out to buy a cup of coffee is bleeding the company. So what's the solution? Bringing the coffee to them. Their head office in Perth has a restaurant, a gym and other facilities. It's so that employees don't leave the office. Guess Ellison's logic is flawless, at least in a dystopian Orwellian sort of way. If workers aren't allowed to leave the building, then surely they'll work more. Clearly, the only path to productivity is to deprive workers of any leisure or autonomy. But Ellison is not alone. China has long mastered this productivity race. In their offices, employees are monitored by AI. The moment someone slacks or dozes off or even slouches in their chair, the camera monitoring you turns red, reminding you that the omnipresent AI overlord doesn't approve. Forget Orwell, this is where AI surveillance meets Machiavellian managerial oversight. And that's not all. Here's a viral Reddit thread. It shows a boss reprimanding an employee for leaving 1 minute early. He says, "Don't make it a habit." Well, as a rational human being, you may ask, what could 60 seconds possibly change? But looks like for managers, it's in this 1 minute that the company loses all its money. It's all part of the modern workplace fantasy. Turn your workers into worker bees, and productivity will magically skyrocket. But here's a wild concept that companies or bosses don't seem to understand. That productivity isn't a quantifiable entity. It can't be bottled or measured or even optimized by trapping employees at their desks. Turns out, you can't strip away people's autonomy and turn them into efficient workers. What a shocker, right? So here's a lesson. Before you start constructing office fortresses or installing Orwellian AI systems, take a moment and consider this. It may sound like a radical idea, but let's start with allowing your workers a little freedom and trust. That could be the real key to unlocking their potential. After all, a productive worker isn't one who's shackled to their desk, it's one who feels empowered to do their best work.
Before we welcome the weekend, are you up for some introspection? We'll take that as a yes, and we have a question for you. What makes you you? Your intelligence, your creativity, your anger, your kindness. What raw ingredients make up your personality, or anyone's for that matter? For more than a century, scientists have been trying to answer this question. They've studied everything from physiology to genes to circumstances to understand what makes a personality. But something seemed to be missing. So over the past decade, they've added one more item to this list: stories, first-person accounts, the life stories that people tell themselves about who they are. Now, you may think stories are, well, just stories, but they do matter. And studies prove this. Stories change how we think about ourselves, how we behave. They help us adapt, grow, and change our lives. Our narratives. Now, the stories we're talking about are not rants or gossip-laden tales. Researchers have a name for this kind of storytelling. It is called life review. And this is a systematic process of reflecting on one's past. It could be done in writing or through conversations. Think of it like writing a screenplay. We visualize the setting, the characters, the scenes, and it matters how we visualize them, what we include and what we don't. Research says that this affects how we feel about our lives. For instance, if we try to remember the good things in a bad experience, it can improve well-being. This won't work every time. Every incident does not have to be meaningful. But most things that seem boring or hard can just be plot points. Studies show that this can reduce depression. It can increase life satisfaction. What's more, life review can also force us to connect the dots to understand why we are the way we are. It pushes us to explore our ancestry, which in turn boosts mental well-being. It makes us feel more connected. Plus, taking stock of life is not just looking back, it can also help us find the next chapter in life. It can help us find purpose. And this too is good for us. It may even help you live longer. But this is not even the best part. Do you know what is? The fact that we get to update the screenplay based on our perspective and our experiences. Each stage of life comes with different challenges, which is obvious to most of us, but studies prove this too. So things that seemed important before, things that turned our lives upside down, may not seem as important now, like your exams or breakups. And a life review can help us accept these changes better. Researchers say it is valuable for people at all ages because it helps all of us. It helps us to reflect. In fact, the impulse to document our lives is as old as time. The human brain loves building narratives. Fun fact, that's how we remember facts better, when they are in a story and not in a list. So whether it's a life review or a digital diary or social media, storytelling has ancient roots. Only now we know that this narrative is important. And if we know, so does capitalism. So there is an entire industry built around our memories. Companies are making our digital photo albums. Ghostwriters are offering to write memoirs. Exotic retreats are inviting guests to write life stories. Sounds like a heavy-duty vacation, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how we do it. What matters is that we reflect on our lives to understand ourselves. People in Brownsville, a city in Texas, have noticed something strange. A giant bust of Elon Musk. It's nearly 9 feet tall and 7.5 feet wide. 9 feet tall. So massive for us, normal sized for Elon's ego. This bust is being carted around in a Tesla Cybertruck. Why? Because Elon's disciples thought it would be fun. But forget the statue. Focus on the vehicle carrying it around, the Tesla Cybertruck. Ever since it was launched in 2019, it has triggered a lot of people, and we get it. The design can be a bit polarizing. For some, it's futuristic. For others, it's a tin-foil box. The Cybertruck has inspired plenty of memes and jokes. Take a look.
Well,
now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Yemen's Houthis storm a Greek oil tanker before blowing it up with explosives. In India's Vadodara, a 15-foot-long crocodile ventures into a locality due to rising flood waters. And the Taipei Zoo celebrates the 20th birthday of a female giant panda. Finally, we are taking you back in history. On this day in 1918, Soviet leader Vladimir Lenin was shot. He was speaking at a factory in Moscow when a woman shot him twice. Lenin was severely wounded, but he ended up surviving the attack. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.
Across continents, one powerful news source.
Bringing you diverse perspectives on the issues that matter.
We go beyond the boundaries to give you that little extra about every sporting moment.
So thank you for making Firstpost 5 million strong. We're counting on your support, and you can trust us to bring you the news unfiltered and unvarnished.
Climate change is on our doorstep. It's time for a revolution to take root. And it starts with 1.4 billion Indians. It starts with one tree for humanity, one tree for Mother Earth, one tree for a future. Project One Tree, a News 18 network initiative.
Obviously today, the T20 World Cup bandwagon has moved across to the West Indies. What can you expect from this?
Hello, I'm Ajit coming to you from Durban, South Africa. Today we have a special show.
We'll start with a report on India's shifting nuclear posture. The first time since India officially became a nuclear power.
Hello and welcome to Firstpost America. I'm Aaron Ham, coming to you live from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C.